right, hello everybody. For those of you who do not know who I am Michael Davis. I'm one of the TFs for the Classical Saxophone Studio. Today I'm going to talk to you about articulation. Really two parts to this talk. The first is covering fundamentals, and then the second part is going to be on slap tongue. Hopefully, I know there's a very vast array of experience and ability in here, but hopefully there's something that is relevant and interesting to everybody in here. So before we get into articulation, we should take a moment to think about what it is that makes up a note. Really broadly and very simplified, there's three parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It's like any good story. And each of these parts can be characterized in different ways depending on your particular philosophy or approach to articulation. The beginning can be an attack, it can be a start, an entrance, a release. The middle can be a sustain or a tone. The end, a release, a taper, or a cut. I myself like to think of release for the beginning, sustain for the middle, and then taper for the end. And you might find it curious that release could be used to characterize either the beginning or the end. And that has to do with the different philosophies I mentioned earlier. At the end, release would be the release of the tone. The beginning, the release would be the release of the tongue from the reed. This is certainly not intended to be limiting by any means. There are other words you can think of to use it, but that's the way we're going to frame articulation today. So articulation, or tonguing, if you will, is one of the most often used and most important ways for you to start tone. When we articulate, we use the tongue to provide a clear beginning to the tone. So there's different ways that you can do this. In a basic articulation, what's most crucial to remember is that the tongue must contact the tip of the reed. That's going to be very important for the rest of the talk. The tip of the reed is what needs to be contacted. What part of the tongue is not as important, or should I say it shouldn't be as prescriptive. There's different ways that you can articulate. You have the tip, which is figure 1 up there. It's pretty straightforward. The tip of the tongue touches the tip of the reed. The second type is figure 2, slightly back from the tip. Many people who think they tip-to-tip tongue are actually doing that. And then figure 3 is called anchor tonguing, which is a little bit of an unfortunate term in that it implies this unnecessary heaviness to the articulation. But why it is called anchor tonguing is because the front of the tongue is anchored behind the lower teeth, and so your contact point with the reed is going to be much further back on the tongue than the other two types. Ultimately, which way should you try to articulate? Well, that comes down to the individual. The physical characteristics of your tongue. If you have a really long tongue, it might be kind of difficult to do a tip tongue. If it's a short tongue, it might be difficult to anchor tongue. It's whatever fits you the best. What's important is that you tongue the tip of the reed. So we understand all of that background information. We should start trying to produce a musical tone. So the note begins, as I said before, when you release your tongue from the reed. Thinking of it in this way, you can apply an analogy to a water faucet. Many of you have probably heard this before. It's something Dr. Nestler advocates for. When you release your tongue from the reed, it's a lot like turning the faucet. The air begins to flow, or the water begins to flow. And I think it's a particularly apt analogy because of that incorporation of air. That's really important. So if a water faucet is functioning properly, is water going to come out immediately, or is there a slight delay as it comes from wherever it is the water source is? It's going to flow immediately, right? So the same should be true with your air. You need to start the air before you remove your tongue from the reed. So now that we're past that, we can think about how we're going to actually start the note. We can use a word or a syllable to conceptualize our articulation. It's a very common thing to do. Most of you, if not all of you, have certainly done that before. Ta is a really common word that we use, or a syllable. Whatever syllable you want to use, doesn't really matter too much, but the emphasis on the vowel sound is really important. The first example up there, lowercase t, uppercase AH, that's the emphasis on the vowel sound. Ta, nice, clear, even tone all throughout. Whereas the second one, big T, little AH, that's the emphasis on the consonant, which we want to avoid. It provides unnecessary explosiveness to the sound at the beginning, and your sound envelope is going to be a little bit more irregular. Ta. So, go for the first one, small T, big AH. Not the second one, big T, small AH. So here's some beginning exercises. These slides are available on Canvas if anyone is having trouble seeing this. This is also from Dr. Nessler's Fundamentals book, which is also available on Canvas. It's a really nice series of exercises to do to practice the beginning of the tone. Line 1 demonstrates the importance of the order of operations that we go through. Not pictured here is where you breathe in. I would suggest thinking of that as like your step 0. So beat 4 and the invisible measure before the measure of the exercise, and then beat 1 of the exercise, you finger the note. If we do this together, we would finger the written F, that's fine. And then we place, or in step 2, we would place the tongue on the reed. Step 3, we blow, but you're not blowing anything through the air yet. You're not blowing any air through the instrument yet, because your tongue is on the reed, stopping it from vibrating. And then on beat 4, you would release, and the tone would sound. We can go through this together if you want. If not, let's take a quick poll. Who wants to do this, or is this pretty basic, straightforward stuff and you don't want to do it? So, who wants to do it? And then who doesn't want to do it? All right, so we'll keep going. The next couple of steps, I think it's worth doing and practicing on your own just to refine your articulation, because once we get to the more advanced stuff that I'm sure everyone is more willing or more interested in waiting for, you need to have a solid basic articulation first. So the next 2 steps, it just accelerates the process further and further, so you have 1 beat where you're placing your tongue on the reed and blowing, but the order of operation still needs to remain intact. Put your tongue on the reed first, and then it just continues to accelerate. We move it on to notes in succession until line 4 down here, in which you're playing a normal scale, but practice it slowly, methodically at first, to really get that basic articulation down. So as you start to increase in speed, practice slowly at first, but here's a couple of bits of advice that are worth keeping in mind as you do so. So move your tongue as little as possible. It's going to be really crucial because the less distance your tongue needs to travel, the quicker you can articulate. Keep the articulations light and bouncy, more like dribbling a basketball than pounding a nail. And then the third one, it's not really going to help you get to faster articulations. It's just something that's important to remember. Always contact the same part of the reed with the same part of your tongue. So always the tip of the reed and whichever part of your tongue that fits your individual characteristics. And then one more slide on exercises to practice to increase speed. The previous exercises, those are really great for refining the basics of your articulation. These are really great for getting faster. So say you can play 16th notes at quarter note equals 100, and you want to get them to 126. Go through these slowly, methodically, and that'll be a good way to go about doing that. Okay, so that's the end of the first portion of our talk on articulation. We have more than enough time to get to slap tonguing, but are there any questions about the basic fundamental articulations?
You had anchor tonguing as an example of like an option. Is that an option, or should you try and straight from that? A lot of professors said anchor tonguing is something you should try and get away from.
I anchor tongue and do pretty well with it. I think Don Cinta described anchor tonguing as how he articulated. So no, it comes down to the individual characteristics of the player for what works for you. As long as you can, again, contact just the tip of the reed while anchor tonguing, you'll be fine.
Awesome.
Any further questions? Yes.
I find when I try to articulate and doing just tip to tip, find that most of the time I just end up getting squeaks or higher partials in the end. Is there something in particular doing wrong with this that causes that?
not sure I have a good answer for that without listening to you do that. And I have you in lessons, so we can do that in lessons and get you a better answer. My gut feeling is that perhaps it's too light of a touch, or that would be my gut feeling, but I think it'd be best to explore that in lessons. Okay, so if there's no other questions, let's go on to what I'm sure more of you are interested in, the advanced articulation. So multiple articulation, double tonguing, triple tonguing, and slap tonguing are probably what come to mind when one says advanced articulation. These techniques are most often going to be found in advanced solo literature, but that's certainly not the only place where you might find them. There's quartet literature, there's slap tonguing, for instance, goes back to like the 1920s in jazz playing. And these techniques are really exciting, interesting, fun to do, but they take a great deal of time and dedicated, focused practice to learn, and there's many great saxophonists who don't do them. That said, I do think that most people can do them. There are those who just physically cannot do what it takes, but with the right amount of patience and dedicated, focused, intelligent practice, I think most people could do either of these things. I'm not going to talk about multiple articulation today, just slap tonguing. So let's start by just defining it briefly before we get into trying to do anything. The sound of a slap tongue comes in a vast array of sounds and colors, qualities. Quite generally, it's a percussive popping sound, somewhat like a wood block. There's two broad archetypes of slap tongue, pitched variety and unpitched variety. The pitched variety, as the name implies, comes with a definite pitch and is much more on the side of a softer pitched woodblock, maybe string pizzicato sound quality, whereas the unpitched variety, as the name implies, has no definite pitch and is much bigger and more aggressive in its sounds, ranging sounds from woodblock to whips. And there's numerous different ways that we can notate this in scores. Here's a few examples. Again, this isn't meant to be limiting in any way. These are just some from the literature that I have experience playing. This top left example is from Rock Me by Barry Cockcroft. It's an example of unpitched slap. And in the score, all you're going to see is this with the appropriate clef and key signature, of course. But luckily, there's an instruction page before the score begins that explains all the numerous extended techniques used in this piece. And so I wanted to show you that. The composer writes that the unpitched slap can be played with any fingering, because again, it's not supposed to have a definite pitch. He just writes it on middle line B flat for notational clarity. And that would sound something like that. The top right example is from the Lars Erik Larsson concerto. Those last 6 notes with the circles above them are pitched slap. There's a definite pitch there. It's not quite so loud and aggressive. The bottom left example from Christian Lauba's Jungle is another example of pitched slap. This is notated differently still. It's got these articulation markings and slaps written above the notes. Again, still just an unpitched slap, so not quite as loud, not quite as aggressive. And then this last example is from a quartet. This is from the baritone saxophone part of Mark Mellett's Revolution. No articulation marking above this. Instead, the composer just chose to write pitched slaps underneath the part, and then when it goes back to normal tonguing, he writes something else there. Something like that. So what is creating this slap, this percussive sound? It's not from the tongue slapping against the reed, as the name might suggest. It is from the reed being pulled away from the mouthpiece by the tongue and then slapping back against the facing of the mouthpiece. So your tongue pulls the reed away by creating some sort of suction or vacuum effect, and then once the stiffness of the reed is too great for it to overcome, slaps back against the facing of the mouthpiece. Before we start to practice it, there's just a couple more things to go over. The first being the embouchure. Don't change your embouchure to play a slap tongue. That statement does need to come with a small asterisk. Don't change your embouchure to begin a note that has a slap tongue articulation. It just doesn't sound quite as authoritative though, and it leaves open that greater possibility that you might disregard that idea and learn to slap tongue without a proper embouchure set. And well, that would make it easier for you. It won't in the long run, because many times in a score you just don't have enough time to go normal embouchure, slap tongue embouchure, normal embouchure, and so on. Pitched slap. This one does not require that asterisk. It can also be thought of as a closed slap. You maintain a normal embouchure and you blow air through the instrument with the initial slap mechanic. So you have a well-formed and set embouchure all through all three stages of tone production. The unpitched slap is what requires that asterisk. It can be thought of as an open slap. If you saw in the Cockcroft example that I did, I opened my mouth. At the same time, I played those slap tongues. You still start with a normal, well-formed embouchure, though, and it's the opening of the mouth that creates that bigger effect. I would recommend starting with pitched slap before trying to do unpitched slap, as the beginnings of the notes are created the same way. So the open mouth slap is just an additional level of challenge that you need to learn. So learning the pitched slap first will help isolate the variables, and you just need to focus on coordinating the opening of your mouth. Then one more very important thing to remember: how do you control the dynamics of it? Not by tonguing more aggressively. That will just lead to more broken reeds than is necessary. The amount of air that you're pushing is what will control the dynamics, just like in normal saxophone playing. If you try to just tongue harder and harder, you're probably going to break some reeds. But if you're doing a slap tongue right, you shouldn't break a reed. I've played many slap tongues in my life, and I've broken one reed. It was early on in the learning process. Okay, so let's try to learn how to slap tongue. The first step is not going to involve any equipment just yet. I do thank so many of you for bringing your saxophones. What we want to start with is saying the word dot. The goal of this is to learn the sensation of what suctioning your tongue to a surface and then pulling it away feels like. Normally when we speak with a D in English, there's that small plosive pop, if you will, dot, to varying degrees of intensity. The goal with this step of the exercise is to try to maximize that. So try to place more of your tongue against the roof of your mouth than you normally would. Don't try to just say it harder. Try to actually suction your tongue to the roof of your mouth. You're probably not going to get a tremendous amount of aural feedback. It's more about learning that sensation. So I can demonstrate it for you, but without a really sensitive microphone, it would be hard to pick up anything. But it's like the difference between dot and dot. Not a huge aural difference, but a significant difference in the feeling inside of the mouth. You can take a few moments to try it, practice it for your neighbors next to you. Okay, that's probably enough dotting. We'll go on to the next step. This is just going to use your reed. Now, I must caution you, be very gentle with these next couple of steps. The likelihood that you break a reed is much higher than when doing a normal slap tongue. The goal with this is going to be, again, to create that sensation of suction on the tongue between a surface. In this case, now you're using a reed. Try to keep the tongue stationary and then gently lift up the reed. Keep just straight up, try to keep it as parallel as you can. In order to heighten the pop sensation, what you need to do is make the middle of your tongue slightly concave. And this will create a little pocket of vacuum, and it's when we break this seal that you'll get a little pop. Again, really, really quiet. Probably can't be heard by anyone up here, but take a few moments, try it yourself, try it with the people around you, and if there's any questions, please ask. Okay, I'm hearing quite a few successful pops. Let's go on to the next step. This is still just the reed, but now we're going to do the reverse. So leave the reed stationary, pull the tongue away. You can keep using as much of the reed as you need to. And again, to create that small pocket of vacuum, if you will, make the middle of your tongue slightly concave and then pull it away to break that seal. Create that pop sound. You can leave the front and back of your tongue in place for this. As we progress further down, you'll have to limit that. But for right now, I would in fact recommend leaving the front of the tongue on and just moving the middle down far enough that you break the vacuum seal. Again, this step's going to be really quiet. I doubt anyone heard what I did. Take a few moments. Try it on your own. Try it with your neighbors. Yeah.
So for this, should the reed be like resting on your lip, or should it be more just open and covered?
Should the reed be on your lip or more open? I would keep it more open. We're not really going for a true slap tongue or anything yet. We're really trying to train the sensation of creating the suction that you need to pull the reed away from the mouthpiece once we get a few steps further. Okay, having a little bit of success, I think. Let's go on to the fourth step. Assemble the instrument. We're not going to be playing anything just yet, so you could do this on just the mouthpiece or mouthpiece and vocal, but I'm going to put the whole instrument together just because it's a little bit more resonant. This step still does not have a formed embouchure, still does not use air. We're, again, just trying to train that sensation that we worked on without the instrument together, but with the reed attached to a mouthpiece. And again, use as much reed as necessary still on this step. That will change soon, though. That's more of a natural slap tongue. It's going to be a lot quieter if you don't form the embouchure. like we're ready to go on to the fifth step. Go ahead and form your embouchure. Don't worry about using air just yet, but form an embouchure. And the sensation is probably going to be a little bit different now because you're limited to however much reed is inside your mouth beyond your embouchure. So if before you were relying on the entire portion of the reed, you're going to need to do a little bit of adjusting to figure out where your tongue can be for this. So are there any questions about this step? If you can avoid it, try to avoid using air just yet. And we'll get that really small, subtle click or pop. Are there any questions about this step? Okay, go ahead and keep, oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess this is for everyone. You mentioned concave tongue, right?
Yes.
I think anybody might interpret that in a different way where you could try to create that concave from the front to the back, like a boat, like an arched boat, like a canoe, or coming up like that from the side. So like which part of the tongue is really creating that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really excellent point.
Because everyone's tongue is shaped differently, so.
Yeah, when I'm saying make the middle of your tongue a little concave, I mean, if your tongue is this flat surface right here, the middle of your tongue, the middle of the part that's touching the reed is going to sink down a little bit, so it's like there's a bowl that you're forming.
Just really the whole tongue all the way around too?
Yes. You're not necessarily lifting other parts of your tongue. The main idea is that you're bringing the middle portion of it down and leaving the rest of it stationary.
Okay. Do you think the edges of your tongue are touching the edges of the reed too?
I suppose that I have a rather wide tongue, so my tongue is often touching both rails of
Right.
the reed.
Okay, yeah, that's what
So yes, I definitely am touching the rails of the reed when I'm doing it.
So you could be doing both then, this and a little bit of this.
I suppose it could be. The main idea to think about though is not to raise parts of your tongue.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, certainly possible. Yeah.
Do you ever move your tongue backward or use more towards like the tip of your tongue and then back a little bit, like to get different effects of it? Like on a piece, like if you're trying to do it faster, you like go towards the tip, make it easier. Or
So
do you just stay in one area?
I try to keep it in about the same place all the time because in order to have enough tongue on the reed to form a seal, you're going to have your tongue much further forward than usual. Ideally, for all of it, your tongue is as far back as it can be, just for the sake of economy of motion and whatnot. If you're going for a really, really big, powerful slap, yeah, there are some. There's wiggle room for all of the stuff I'm telling you, but as you're learning it and as a rule of thumb, this is the place to start. Okay, if there's no more questions, let's go on to step 6 because it's basically the same thing but with air. Start with a low B flat, or if you have a barrier, I suppose you could do a low A. The lower notes are definitely easier to get this slap tongue effect on, just because they're a little bit more resonant. so you can think about what your tongue is doing every single time you do it. And I'll try to keep it nice and secco. Don't worry about playing sustained tone. That can certainly come later, though. Go ahead and keep trying it unless there are any questions. There's just a little bit of time left, and there's some exercises that are at the end of the slides that I want to go over briefly. These are derived from the exercises I showed you on fundamental articulation, so it breaks down the process really slowly and methodically. You finger the note, you suction the tongue of the reed, pull it away to create the slap effect. The usage of air is not incorporated in this, so I would suggest doing it without air first and then adding air in the appropriate spot, which would be between the suctioning of the tongue to the reed and then pulling it away. Does anyone want to come down and demonstrate it for everybody? Or you can do it from your spot, wherever most comfortable. So, nice and slow, just like this. I'll talk through it. So I'll count you in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Finger the note, suction. Perfect. Really good open slap. Anyone else? 1, 2, 3, 4. Finger the note, suction the tongue, pull away. Yeah, that's the right idea. Okay. Anyone else want to try the first one? That's because you want to try the next one. It's just doing multiple in succession. The first line, you still have that beat to suction the reed in, suction the tongue to the reed. And then the second line is about doing it without that extra bit of pause. So the first one would be, and then the second line would be, and when you're doing these, you want to make sure that it sounds exactly the way you intend it to sound each time, and there's not any degree of variation. Right. They all need to be exactly the same. Everything we do should be done with intention. Does anyone want to do one of these? Any volunteers? All right. Which one are you going to do? 3 or 4? 4. All right. 1, 2, ready, go. Yeah, excellent. Really good. Someone else want to do one? Okay, that's because you want to do the next one, which is with moving notes. Just a 5-note scale. You want to try it? All right. I'll count you in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, pretty good. How we can improve that is to make it a little bit more secco and more consistency to the suctioning of the tongue. Instead of just more to the front of it. More poppy. Yes, there we go. That's the way to think of it. You want to try it again? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. That's the right idea. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So we're almost out of time. Hopefully everyone was able to come away with something that was useful to them, that they were interested in. Are there any questions that I can answer? Yes. Could you demonstrate it? I think your embouchure is not completely sealed, and because you're aiming for pitch, right? Your embouchure is not fully sealed, perhaps, and you're not pushing enough air. That's from a more sealed embouchure, and then increasing my air. Anything else? Yes.
Is this harmful to the feet?
No, like I said, you shouldn't break a reed. As far as maybe wearing it down earlier, maybe. I haven't noticed that it does when I'm slap tonguing correctly. I play on some older reeds even, and I don't really notice it changing them. Okay, yes?
How big is the danger for splinters in this?
It should be near zero.
Okay.
If your technique is way off, that certainly goes up, but if you're using the right technique, the tongue is going on the flat part of the reed. You're not stabbing the tip or anything. Yes. Okay, well, we should go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you for letting me give you this little talk on articulation. If there's any more questions, pick up.